All right. Thank you for the introduction. Surprise, surprise, I am here to talk about design systems. And the last 2 days have been slightly difficult because, like, in the what's your talk about? And to be honest, I don't know what my talk is about until now. I'm hoping that you tell me what my talk is about, but it's more like like this is therapy now, right? This is a therapy session. I'm gonna talk about my feelings, and then all of you can help me out later. So to get started, just to get like a feel of the room, how many folks work on a design system team? All right. How many folks are designers? Wow. How many folks are developers? Oh, okay, that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. I was scared I'm gonna like. Never mind. I did learn CSS. Don't worry. Okay, so I'm Sid. I work at Code Sandbox, which is like an online IDE thing. It's fun. And before that, I used to work on the design system team at Auth0. So in fact, me and Fernando, somewhere in the room, there he is. So we started the design system team at Auth0, and then it grew and adopted and stuff. It's fun. So this is kind of like the general sentiment about design system, right? Everyone's shouting design system, and it's just like it wouldn't stop, and it's like super hype right now. And once in a while, like a friend of mine would just like ping me and ask me a question like this, like, is Bootstrap a design system? I was like, it's a good question, and I just don't know. Like, maybe, right? So I kind of looked up all the definitions of like people smarter than me, and this is kind of my favorite one. It's by Kari Saarinen. He said it's a set of, I'm going to break this down. So it's a set of principles and patterns that have to be shared and integrated so that they define the overall design of the product. I'm going to quickly go through this because I know all of you already probably know this and it's boring. So principles as in like the rules and guidelines about colors, tone of your brand, things like spacing strategy, all of those are like principles, right? Then you've got patterns like reusable UI blocks or design assets that can be used to compose your applications, right? Those are the what. And then this is this is like the part I really like, which is the attributes of these patterns and principles. They have to be shared between designers, developers, product managers, everyone basically. So every time I see like a design system, like somebody says, we've launched our design system, and it's like a sketch file, I'm like, it's a design system, but like, show me the rest of it, right? Like open source all of it, not just like one part of it. So it's like, because the fun isn't between those layers. And it has to be integrated in your workflow and process, right? So the tools people use every day. So it has to be in your sketch or framework. It has to be in your code, so like React components. It has to be everywhere. And the goal is to basically improve the overall design of the product. So not just define it, but also keep improving it, right? And now you might already have some of this in your teams, right? If you're a designer and you consume a style guide, well, that's part of the design system, right? You don't need everything else for it to qualify as a design system. If you have a shared component library in like React or something, there are design decisions already baked into it. When somebody imports like a button or a page header, they're also importing all the design decisions that were built into the component. That's part of your design system. And the design system could mean different things for different companies, right? It's usually depending on how big your company is, what's the culture like, how does the communication happen. So Bootstrap is a design system, yeah, like sure, why not? And my design system journey kind of started at Auth0, and it was a fun thing because the design system team over there was part of the design org, right? And it's kind of interesting because based on where does the system team start defines what does the system mean for the company and how does it evolve. So yeah, it was part of the design system, the design org, not the engineering org, which means we like used a lot of post-it notes and put it on like the wall or like the remote wall on like a shared screen, right? And then, oh, by the way, stock photography is like a rabbit hole. Do not search for stock photography at 2 in the night, right? Sometimes we wore hats, and then it was pretty cool, like group of designers, and then we had 2 engineers in the team in like a sea of designers. It was super nice. I really enjoyed my time. So yeah, but the design, basically because it started in the design org, what it meant for us was a set of variables and assets shared with all the designers. Let's call it a theme file or style guide, and a set of React components that distributed these design decisions outside to the engineering org. And that was really interesting because what we're essentially talking about is I would go to like another team in the engineering org and say, hey, we built a bunch of components, and they'd look at, aren't you from the design team, right? So basically we had to like build up a lot of trust so that, yeah, like can designers code? And it's like, can designers give you your entire component library? So we had a lot of trust building to do there. And it's very interesting because if you look at this is my favorite component that we built. It's like a page header. It's not super fancy. But behind that mechanical React API of like title description are a bunch of decisions hidden. So like what element should be on the header? Is it an H1? Is it an H2? Which action should come first? Is it the primary one, secondary one? What's the spacing between them? What's the color of our primary action? And then how much space is between like the header row and the description? What should be the spacing strategy? Are we using margin bottoms and margin tops? What should be the tab order for us? Or what should be like the order in which the screen reader reads it out? Should it read the actions first or should it read the description first? So a lot of aesthetics are baked in, but also a lot of UX and also accessibility, layout. There's a lot of design decisions that are baked in. And this was great because it basically meant the members of the design system team were allowed to spend a lot of time on the design, the UX, right? And the application developers kind of got that for free. So this is like a simplified example because I don't work at Auth0 anymore, so I'm not going to show the. So this is my design skills on the board. So we have like a modal for login, and then you have a form, right? And forms and modals are individually a lot of fun, but when you club them together, there's like so much UX to think about. It's like, should something be focused by default, right? So that you can start typing. What happens when you press tab or click on the next one? What are the highlight states? How do we show the errors, right? So there's a lot of, and then how does it look on mobile? So there's a lot of things that come up. And then it honestly does not feel fair to ask someone who's also working on the feature, and they're thinking about state management, or they're thinking about how does styling work on iOS, to also make them think about all of these things, right? And that is how oftentimes we end up with like it's like it looks good, but it's not pixel perfect. Or like somebody forgot about accessibility because they didn't think about it. I mean, they don't care about it too much. And I really like being on the system team there because it was literally our job to jump in these rabbit holes and like spend 2 weeks. I spent 2 weeks on a modal, right? And I didn't feel guilty about it because that was literally my job to get the modal right once so that everyone else can use it and they don't have to think about all of that. Which is interesting because I really like this article by Brad Frost. He talked about bridging the front-end gap. And he talked about this concept that front-end has become like this massive ecosystem where you kind of have like the front of the front-end, which is the UI part of it, and the back of the front-end, some like data fetching with GraphQL and stuff. And it's like, this is my opinion, but it's kind of harsh to expect somebody to be good at both things at the same time, right? And more I find myself sitting on the front of the front end rather than the back. So the specialization actually helped us distribute that role, and I was like, my team would sit on the front of the front end, and then we had folks sitting on the back of the front end who are really good at like, and Auth0 is a security company, so they're really good at security, which is like a beast on its own. But I'm slightly embarrassed. I worked there for 2 years. I don't know shit about security. I don't know how the company works. So story moves on, and then we got some adoption. People are using it. It's amazing. And then one day, the marketing team folks come to us, and they're like, "Oh, we heard you're building a design system. Can we have it?" Like, we didn't really think of the marketing team first, right? We were thinking of the application team. And the funny thing is, all products are not created equal. So this is examples from GitHub, right? So you see the application, it's pretty tight. The spacings are very small, and the font sizes are pretty small. But their documentation side or the blog side has like a lot more spacing, a lot bigger font sizes. Like the scale just shifts to the bigger sizes, but it's still the same brand. So even though we were building a design system, we were building it with the application in mind, and then the blog just like it didn't fit, right? So they had to do, what we ended up saying was, you can use our design tokens, but then they had to do a lot of labor so that to fit our design tokens into their components. This is a fun meme. So like the design system, we built reusable components with like type, CSS, JS, GraphQL. And there's this one team that actually used like Backbone or something. Like there's always a legacy team, right? And then we basically had nothing for them, right? We couldn't even like share our tokens or anything. So there's always this like one jQuery or Backbone team, and we just had nothing for them. So around the same time last year, I was at this exact conference where I saw this talk by Diana Mounter, who works at GitHub, and she introduced this quote by a coworker of hers, which said, and I really like this quote, still stuck to me. I still think about this sometimes. Which is, she talked about brand on a spectrum, and she talked about GitHub, where the GitHub brand is defined, but it doesn't mean the same thing for every product. So one product could be like the GitHub application, like the github.com is super dialed in with the system, but then they do things like event websites. They just hosted a conference, and it looks completely different, right? But it still looks like it's from the same company. So it's like you need to follow the brand, but it's on a spectrum, right? And that kind of really blew me away, because that's what we wanted. That kind of got me thinking about layers of a design system. So we wanted folks to be able to tweak our components without having to fall back to like lower abstraction of design tokens and then rebuild all their components again. And when I thought about it, this wasn't something new, right? The clean code principles and reusability and don't repeat yourself, all of this has been around in our industry for years. You don't really want to, the mistake we did was we created abstractions too early that locked us into a field. You want to keep things flexible, right? The funny thing is clean code isn't really an accident, right? You don't end up with clean code. You really have to think about it and architect it from the start. And I've been thinking about it, the same concepts apply to design systems as well. Essentially, you kind of have to design systems, right? If you're not thinking about how you're building your design system, it's going to go in a direction which you might not like. So yeah, we were dealing with this tough problem, and then I left the company. And then I took like a year-long break. And now I'm at this 10-member startup code sandbox. And even though it's like a super tiny company, even with like just 5 or 6 people that touch the UI, we're already seeing some of the problems that design systems could solve. So they're like design inconsistencies. We end up duplicating a lot of elements. You fix one, the other one's still broken. Like we're seeing all the same problems. And I've been thinking about this, and it's like, maybe just because I worked on design system, I feel like that's the answer, right? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail to you. And at this stage of the company, I honestly can't really justify building a design system team, right? Imagining a 10-member company, 5 of the people work on a design system team. I can't even justify spending all of my time right now, working on the design system. But I'd really like to start putting in the work in like tiny bits that can help us now. So instead of thinking of it like a hammer, I've been thinking about it like a Swiss Army knife, right? Which has like many tools. And I kind of ran with this analogy a while, and then I went to Amazon and got lost. So it's like a Swiss Army knife. You have a bunch of tools in your knife toolkit. And all of these together kind of come up with building a design system. So, and I wonder what you would call such a thing, right? It's almost like it's a set of tools that can be shared by the team, and it can be integrated in a process, right? It's kind of like a system that helps you design a design system, right? It's a design system. So I kind of laid down what are all the things we built in the design system team to help build the design system. I was thinking about tokens, components, documentation, usage guideline. There was a Gatsby theme for documentation. There's like Webpack pre-sale, Sketch-Lib. There were so many things that we ended up building, which people wouldn't really see. All of this was like used to build a component, but at the end, people would just say, I'm going to import this, or I'm going to drag this from my Sketch library and paste it. And they wouldn't really think about all the decisions behind, which is what you want. And I actually went and like looked this knife up just to know how much it cost, because that'd be really cool if I brought it to the conference. And it's $74. I'm not going to get it. So that's kind of like, and the fun is it also comes in a dark theme, which is $6 more expensive. So I've been thinking about that analogy, and I realized at this stage today, I don't really need the entire toolkit. So maybe I can build a cheaper Swiss Army knife that just has like 2 or 3 things that we really need right now. And I keep adding more slots into the knife as we go. So the rest of the talk, I'm quickly going to talk about all of the ideas that I'm kind of using right now. And the biggest one for me has been constraint-based design, right? Totally stolen from like the big design system world and brought into like a very tiny team. So the core concept of it is you have a theme or a set of variables, and you want to integrate them into components. So when you're having a conversation about design, it shouldn't look like this, where Danny's the one of the two design folks that we have in the company. It shouldn't look like this. And I'm asking, what's the color? And it says, let me check and like paste this. Do you notice Slack actually renders the small thing? Like how far have we gotten where our chat tools understand hex codes and print them out? Like this seems like going in a weird direction. What you want is inside your tool. So in this case, for me, it's like in the code, I should be able to say like background and then use the autocomplete features and like get those colors because I don't want to make that decision. I just want to use the decisions that's already made. Essentially make the right thing easy to do. And I speak for myself, but honestly, I speak for all developers. We're super lazy, right? Everyone's super lazy. So I would rather use something that's already in the system than try to figure out what hex code or like go to Figma, do like the inspect thing, and then find out which color it is. So that's where it should be more work to introduce an inconsistency than to follow suit. And for the like two developers in the room, this is how my theme file looks right now. So I'm kind of I sold my soul to JavaScript a few years ago, so like everything is JavaScript now. And I really like this spec called System UI. It's not the first one, it's just the one I like. And you end up defining all your colors, like I define all my grays, all my blues, and then you make decisions on them. So I'm gonna say all, like my brand colors are actually the blue colors, right? So every time I say brand 500, it internally aliases to blue 500. And this is great for like that one edge case when you get acquired by Microsoft and then you have to change everything to blue. And then you can just change like the brand from, oh, bad example, damn it. Who else can acquire? Adobe, right? So then you go from brand theme.colors.blue to theme.colors.red, and then your whole brand, like you don't have to change the rest of the world. You also start making some aliases. So I want to think of text colors as like, what's the heading color? What's the subtle color when I want, right? And they all map to like some shade of gray in the system. The fun thing is you can actually do these in our tools right now. So this is Figma. And when I want to see like what did Danny choose for the start thingy, it doesn't actually mention the hex code. It mentions the Figma token, which is text subtle. And that's what I put in my code because that's what the code also understands. And then we've got like spacing, shadows. We're using the 4-point grid, I guess. And we're using random font sizes on it's an algorithm. I don't get it. Danny seems to be confident this will work. We just pasted it. How do you use this component? How do you use this like theme and get it integrated into your components, right? So this is one way to do it. We use style components because everyone's like super into JavaScript. And you can import the theme and you can say, I have a form label. I want theme.colors.text.subtle, right? Instead of finding the hex code. I want theme.font size is the second one, right? Because that's also on a scale. And style components gives you like better tools, so you don't have to import theme everywhere. You can get it from the props and things. You can use a theme provider there. And this is where it gets really interesting. So we use with theme UI, with system UI, the theme I mentioned, the spec I mentioned, you can also get style system/CSS, which is utility from the same developer. Shout out to Brent Jackson. I kind of like use everything here. And that lets you, instead of saying theme.colors.text, if it's a color, it's probably going to come from colors. So you just say, give me text.subtle, right? You say font size, the second one on the scale. And then essentially what you're doing, even while you're coding, when you're looking at something, you say, this font size looks a little too tiny. I don't like this. Can we bump it to the next number? And it kind of would scale with the next allowed value on your scale, which is predefined. And it almost feels like designing in the editor now. And I feel like a designer, which is like validation for me. But essentially what we're doing is instead of hit and trial, instead of like going into dev tools and like trying a bunch of values and copy pasting 5.25 RM back, we're looking at 1, 2, 3, and then I know these values are already, they're already vetted and they work. In fact, this actually happened to us last week, where last week, we just shipped something and we built the whole thing on this font scale. And it looked, like, trust me, it looked really good inside Figma. But when we rendered in Chrome, it looked really bad. Like the fonts just did not render the same way. And like Safari was even worse. So what we realized is like, it looks good in Figma, but the font sizes just don't work. We need to be at a higher font size for any legibility. So the lucky thing we could do is we just like got rid of the smallest font size and added 1 at the end. And then the font size 1 became 2, 2 became 3. Like we just bumped up the entire scale. And the design kind of remained the same, but with a lot more legibility. So that's the first thing I want to like pitch, which is like constraint-based design, but not just for design tools, but also in the code. The second thing I've been looking at a lot right now is design ops. So at Auth0, we did a bunch of design ops in the design system team. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what's the most scrappy design ops that I can do to get the same benefits. So the first one is getting those symbols, getting those tokens from Figma into my theme file. And there's like a cult thing in code, which is like the code should be the source of truth for everything because code is versioned and whatever. It doesn't have to be that way, right? Like we can't trust, like I trust Danny to not do breaking changes in Figma, and he knows what he's doing. He'll like create a clone of everything. And so I've started treating Figma as the source of truth for a lot of things, like the font sizes, the colors, the border radii, and oh, speaker plug. So, okay, I'm not going to do this, sorry. And then I've been working on this like tiny tool for doing the same thing, but translating it into system spec, the same theme spec we're using. I want Figma to spit out my theme so that I can start using that. And it's been really good. So if Danny like lays out our colors and our typography like this, it generates the CSS for that, and that's the one we use. So the Figma now becomes the source of truth, and every time we have an update, we just like sync between the two. But that's just like theme for JavaScript, right? You also want to write tokens once and be able to use them everywhere. I kind of chose, so we have so many plugs here. It feels like everyone I talk about is already here. So I've been playing around with this another tool, which kind of takes the JavaScript and spits out CSS variables from it. So from Figma, if you're able to get this, the theme file, you can convert that into a CSS variable version because it all follows the same spec, right? So the homepage, which doesn't really use any JavaScript, can use CSS variables because we also don't care about IE anymore and get the same effect. So that's only for like our, I'm lost. This only works for like our cult way, which is like JavaScript and CSS on the system UI. But if you're looking for something like which is way more extendable, you might want to look at Salesforce Ux/Theo, which is kind of where I got a lot of these ideas, but simplified them to just handle our use case. Remember this example, that all products are not really the same? What's been really cool is we've been able to say, like, this is our base theme, and then on top of the base theme, we're gonna just like change the space scale and the font scale to a bigger version, and you reuse all of the values, right? So it's the same concept of brand on a spectrum, where you use the base brand, but then some of the values you want to bump them up onto a higher scale to get to the field for the blog. Finally, there's this piece which is like, even though we're writing JavaScript all the time, like we're writing our styles inside JavaScript, there are like way too many use cases where I want CSS. Like a problem would, like for the homepage especially, it would just be way easier to do it in CSS. And that's where I've been spending some time recently, where this is the thing I showed you before. It uses the theme spec. And if you look at it, this is what we export for our React components. And then this is how I've been laying them out recently, where I just like extract the style from there to like a different file or a different variable, I guess. And the bottom two lines are relevant for the React component. But if you look at this thing, it's not actually CSS or CSS in JS. It's just like it's like a rule set. Like the form should have our 4 padding and the form label should have these 2 properties. This is just like a object syntax for it. I've been wondering if I can extract this, like if I can just export this. Going from here to here doesn't seem like a really far stretch, right? It makes sense. You already are naming your components. You're already using the system. But when you spit out CSS, you want to like interpolate those values and actually get what they stand for in the theme, so that we can maintain our theme in JavaScript, write our styles with this object syntax, but then be able to use it on our React components, but also in CSS for our homepage. And that's been really cool. Yeah, so this is also like a tool that is in the same chain called Style CSS. I should mention all of these tools are like super experimental. And yeah, if you like to play around with them, you can. This is a tool that also become like a really core part of my tool set. It's not something we've built, it's something it's outside, which is from Chromatic. And do I have oh, I've got a video, nice. And the whole idea of chromatic is if you write stories, if you document your examples, you can also diff those examples on every change. So for every pull request, you can look at what has changed, and then there's like an approve or reject button. So we use this in Auth0 quite a bit, where I'd make some changes, and then I wouldn't merge them until Fernando also said, yes, this is what we wanted to do, this looks good. And then if it's not, he'll just like leave a comment there that this border radius doesn't feel nice, maybe we should try this, and then we'll do that. So what I encourage all of you to do is think about your own tinier Swiss Army knives, and think about what ideas can you steal and what can give you the most impact, even if it has somebody else's name and I assume that's a birth date on it, right? My tiny toolkit is sitting here. You can have a look if you'd like, and that's all I have. Thank you.